So, Phil, thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast, Therapy for Guys. I'm delighted to connect with you and to have this conversation today.
Likewise.
Yeah, so I know you don't know this, but one of the things that maybe selfishly I wanted when I started my own podcast was to one day interview some of the hosts in my like top three favorite podcasts. And Weird Studies is up there. I'm sure I've listened to every episode, some more than once, and I had the opportunity to interview JF last year. And yeah, it's really cool to finally get to see you and talk to you, and I'm excited about our conversation.
Well, thank you very much. Well, it's a delight to be talking to you today.
Yeah. And I've got to say, I don't want to make you blush, but you have the incredible podcast voice. And and I just love how many times and just the way that you say motherfucker. So I'm hoping that at
I'll see if
some
I can
point,
work it in today.
yeah, please, like that's going to be my goal is for you to at least say it once. And I think that'll make me happy and probably a lot of my listeners too.
Well, if we end up talking about the thing that has really been boiling my blood recently,
Oh,
which is the all the stuff going on with Dana White of the UFC. So, for those of you who don't know me from my podcast or anywhere else, I'm a huge fight fan. And it's hard for a civilized human being to live down being a fight fan. But lately, the behavior from particularly the UFC, its fans, and its managers, its executives has been so execrable um, that I can't even handle those motherfuckers anymore. I can't
yes, you.
even handle those motherfuckers. And if we're going to be talking about masculinity and the beast in me, which was the theme that I suggested to you,
Yes.
um, yeah, we got a few things to talk about today,
Okay, awesome. Now,
motherfucker.
there you go. There you go. So can we just go there with the UFC? Will be honest. I'm not that. I know what it is. I have a lot of male clients that love that shit and get into it and even do it themselves, not at a high level, but
But they
what's been
train.
yeah, what's been bothering you about it?
Well, okay, so I feel like I need to set this whole thing up. Like, why did I just suddenly, before you had a chance to finish your introduction, before we really got settled, why did I just hijack this conversation by
Well,
talking
I'll
about
get to
UFC
analyze
of
you in a
all
minute, but no.
things? um, it's funny because for me, I was not always a fight fan. So
Mm,
at one point, in fact, I can remember one of the worst New Year's Eves I've experienced, and that is saying something. As I think New Year's Eve is basically a bullshit holiday, and it
mm.
annoys me. The
And
only
it
time
actually
I
comes up
ever
in the
have,
song, right?
that's true. It does. It does. I didn't even think of that. But I was thinking about like how this one time I was stuck with a bunch of people I didn't know at a New Year's party, and I was located by the TV that was playing mixed martial arts. This would have been around 2000. So this is the stone ages of mixed martial arts. And I
Got you.
remember just being like, this is torture. I cannot imagine what kind of barbarian, what kind of knuckle dragging, nose picking savage could possibly enjoy this. And then about 15 years later, I was in the midst of a terrible 2 year depressive episode.
Mm,
Um, Terrible. And it was that episode that really forced me to get real about my mental health.
wow.
Um, and there was a point, I don't know, it's often said that um, the uh, the opposite of joy is not sadness, but apathy.
Mm,
And that was how I felt. All of the enthusiasms and passions that I felt for things in my life had just completely dried up. And I remember I didn't really know anything about depression at that point, but like kind of groping my way blindly for
sure.
some kind of way out. And in the middle of this, and it turns out this is not unusual. People finding combat sports when they're at their lowest and finding there's something that kind of pulls them out of themselves.
Mm,
Um, it was right around the time that Chris Weidman had very unexpectedly knocked out Anderson Silva. And I don't expect everybody to understand what that means, but it was like a famous surprising turn of events in mixed martial arts. And I'd somehow heard about it and saw a clip on social media, and then that just pulled me down a rabbit hole. And I didn't know why I wanted to watch this stuff that formerly I'd considered awful. Um, but I knew that it's sort of like, if you're cold, you go in the direction of where it's warm.
Sure.
It's not intellectual, it's sort of more instinctive. And I got really, really super into the fight game, started training boxing myself. And like a lot of people who come into like martial arts gyms, for me, the practice of the sweet science, not just brawling, not violence, but like, an organized and structured and disciplined skill
Sure.
was immensely important to me in developing whatever kind of like autonomous strength and structure I
Mm.
needed to kind of deal with my stuff at that time. And this is like a decade ago, right? So what the fight game isn't just about entertainment, although it certainly is that. I have this sort of feeling, I feel a certain kind of way about it. And anybody who's followed the fight game for 5 minutes knows that it's a terrible, dirty business, and has
Mm.
been since the 18th century, since the days of the London prize ring. I was not under any illusion about that. But what has happened just lately is that Dana White, the capo di tutti capi of mixed martial arts, the president of the UFC, a deeply petty and authoritarian man, good friend of Donald Trump's,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and somebody who I have never had much of a partiality to. On New Year's Eve, he and his wife were at a nightclub in Mexico and got in a physical fight where Dana White, who's built like a brick shithouse, a big middle-aged guy, is about exactly my age,
Okay.
and his wife, who looks like she's 90 pounds soaking wet, trading slaps, but needless to say, not exactly what you might call a fair exchange. He was caught on video slapping his wife, not once, but
Oh, man.
repeatedly. And what has happened is that everybody just hid out and waited for it to blow over.
Mm.
So ESPN doesn't want anything to get in the way of their money coming in. And Endeavor, which owns the UFC, doesn't want anything to mess with their money. And Dana White is used to being taught to capo de tutti capi. It's like, who are these peasants, these little people who demand that I should pay some kind of
Mm.
price for beating my wife in public?
Mm.
And so
Wow, he
he,
is a
like,
motherfucker.
yes, he is. And yesterday I didn't see this, but gave a press conference where he announced that no, he would receive no sanction either from ESPN, Endeavor, or anyone else, um, because he now has to be known as a guy who slapped his wife, and isn't that punishment enough, really?
Mm.
And it's not just that. It's also that the MMA community, such as it is, and not all MMA fans are complete assholes. I need to point this out. I would like to
Sure.
think that I am not a complete asshole. At best, a partial asshole,
Yeah,
right?
that's how I see myself too.
Yeah, a partial asshole. But and there are a lot of really great guys, and also some really great journalists. I can mention Luke Thomas, Ben Folks, Chad Dundas, uh, Ariel Helwani, who really have been striking the what I think is the appropriate note of shock and censure. But for the most part, what we have seen is a servile and bootlicking class of so-called journalists who've been publishing puff pieces saying, well, Dana White has been under a lot of pressure lately. For fuck's sake, like this is the 50s.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, my husband hits me sometimes, but he works really hard. Like, how fucking retrograde is this? And the fans, you want to talk about retrograde, the number
Mm.
of fans, many of them admirers of one Andrew Tate,
Oh, God.
coming out of the woodwork to be like, hey, equal rights means equal lefts. If you can fucking believe that, sorry, I'm going off on your show. ladies and gentlemen of the podcast audience, please understand I'm not usually this much of a hothead, but I have been chewing on this for several days, and I
Mm,
think that might be it for me in the sport of mixed martial arts. I'm also a boxing fan, and I'm just sort of like, boxing is a dirty business too.
mm,
But at least there, when someone um, does something really awful, usually people will say so. And sometimes there are even consequences. But MMA is like a banana republic ruled by some kind of Trumpian um, sort of, what's the word? Strong man.
mm.
And nothing ever
Phil,
happens over there to hold anybody to account. And it's making me crazy because, to get to the theme we were
yeah,
talking about, the beast in me, this
yes,
is a whole world of men who have decided to go full beast.
wow,
And I want to, and I got a little quote for you. This is from Dr. Johnson, he of the famous dictionary. I
yes,
read this when I was looking up something else. He who makes a beast of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man. And
mm,
that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we see here. And so
mm,
I have been chewing on this. I've
wow.
been so mad about this, and I kind of have nowhere to put my rage about it. And so this is my gift to you.
Thank you. Oh, this is a tremendous gift. I feel blessed right now. Do you know, or I should say, maybe, do we know how someone like Joe Rogan has responded to this? Has he been silent? Has he said something? And I know he's kind of a controversial figure. He's a huge podcaster. I believe he works for the UFC or has some type of role.
Yeah.
I'm curious what
For,
he said.
well, he's been commentating for UFC for years and years, and now, of course, he's huge and rich and so on,
Right.
and he's one person who doesn't actually need to be afraid of Dana White, except I think he and Dana White are just like really good friends. And my
Mm,
impression is that Rogan has said nothing one way or the other. I feel like I would have heard about it if he had,
okay.
but I
Okay.
suspect he's um, one of those people who's hiding under a big pile of coats, waiting for this all to blow over.
Got you. Okay. Man. So, okay, Phil, I would love to kind of get into this song that you recommended we kind of like orbit around for this episode, The Beast in Me by Nick Lowe. But before we do that, can I ask you a question about your childhood?
You can ask.
Okay. No, don't worry. I know in our exchanges, we both admitted to each other that we're very private people. So I'm going to honor that. You can honor that for me if you choose. Um, the question that I'm curious about is, and this is something I've asked other guests before, is was there, whether it's a philosophical or spiritual or religious kind of background that maybe shaped the trajectory of your life? And is that still something that you hold to? Have you grown out of it? I just always like to know where my guests kind of come from.
It's a good question. It's a good question for me because I've been remarkably inconsistent in my commitments over the years. There are very
Got
few
you.
things I really and truly think now that I really and truly thought when I was like 20.
Okay.
Um,
I
and
love that.
well, that's good. I thought I was confessing a feeling.
No, maybe I love it because I think that's me as well.
Well, so sometimes it's a little difficult to find like a kind of a thread. But if there's one thing I will say that has been consistent and has never changed, um, it has been a very strong orientation to art, and
Mm,
um, not just this art or that art, but the kind of the idea of art, like what art is abstractly. And perhaps this is unsurprising because podcast that I do with JF Martel, Weird Studies, is an arts and philosophy podcast. And um, unsurprising that we should do a podcast about the thing that we are most passionate about and that he and I have most in common. But it's a sort of you know for me, okay, so one thing I actually talked about on one of our shows, actually Patreon Extra recently, was an experience I had when I was quite young, like in
okay.
elementary school, like grade 2, 3, 4, 5. Um, I'm not sure what was wrong with me, I grew up in the 70s in Northern Ontario, which was not exactly a place where that was crawling with like sophisticated mental health practitioners. So it's not like I really knew what was going on, but there was something kind of wrong with me. I sometimes wonder if it was like, yeah, I don't know what it was. I'm not going to try and self-diagnose, but for whatever reason, it was very hard for me to connect with other people and with the classes with like at my school. I was
Sure.
this really weird, very isolated little kid who didn't respond appropriately to, you know, academic prompts or social ones for that matter. And I was put in the learning disabled group at school for several years, which, again, this is Sudbury in the 70s. It's not like Sudbury was a bastion of pedagogical progressivism
Sure.
at the time. And so, you know, learning disabled was not actually any kind of enriched program. It was just sending the dumb kids into a different room so they would cease to bother the normal kids.
Mm.
This happened several years, and it gave me an insight into the cruelty of adults, who some of whom positively delighted in removing privileges from the dumb kids.
Mm.
And then, because there was a teacher at the school who thought that I was perhaps put in the wrong place, insisted that I be tested by somebody from the Board of Education. And then they decided that I wasn't a dumb kid, I was a smart kid. And then
Mm.
they put me in a different group, which has given me a lifelong awareness of how arbitrary our social judgments of one another are, and how much just some authority just says you're a certain kind of person. Everybody, without exception, will believe it and
Yeah.
will treat you in that way, which has given me a certain skepticism about authority throughout my
Mm.
life. God knows why I ended up being a university professor. But,
That's interesting.
but in any event, all of this, I'm sorry, it's a very roundabout way of
No, I love it.
answering
Please keep
answering
going.
your question. I just sort of felt like all the parts in me didn't fit, they didn't work. But then I started playing music. I
Mm.
started playing piano seriously when I was 9.
Okay.
And which, if you want to be a classical pianist, is actually kind of late. It's sort of like being a gymnast or something. If you want to go to the Olympics, you better already have a bunch of medals in your bedroom by the age of 6 or whatever. But
Sure.
like, you know, and clearly I didn't become a professional classical pianist, but I was very, very serious as a piano student for a while. And it was when I started really playing a lot of music that I felt like all those discordant bits that didn't quite fit in me knitted together into something.
Mm.
Like doing art, playing music, you know, it just integrated the whole me. You know, my body, which felt like uncoordinated and awkward, you know, my mind, which went every which way and which I couldn't discipline, um, hence being stuck in the LD program,
Sure.
my emotions, and you know, it gave me the presentiment of something else, call it soul or spirit. And somehow there's this thing I could do, playing piano, that would take all of those things and bring them together and make a single whole entity of them.
Wow.
And the power of not just music, but art generally, you know, art as such, the thing that humans do in making art, the power of art to communicate to people, but to reach inside them, to remap them, to make you, I'm not even going to say necessarily better. I don't know. Maybe I was better when I was like a weird little kid going every which way, but like, I feel like that the practice of art helped me become who I am.
Mm.
I remember thinking that really, really from like age 12, suddenly feeling like a switch had been flicked on in my brain. And I'm just like, wow, this is who I am. I remember having that feeling. That feeling has never left me.
Okay.
And, you know, also the thing with like picking up boxing for me was also realizing this, like, it's not just the practice of art, it can be practice of other things.
Mm.
Or, you know, boxing is a kind of an art in a way, but
Sure.
practice, you know, what you do as a musician, what you do as a Zen Buddhist, which I also am, um, and what you do as a boxer or an athlete is you practice. And that practice is something that orients the human to their humanity. Um, So in recent years, I've expanded thinking of that to not just the practice of art, but just practice as such. So, very roundabout answer to your question.
Yeah.
If I were to say the one constant, whether I've intellectualized it this way or not throughout my life, nevertheless, the constant that has been the greatest power for good in my life has been practice. Does this make sense?
Makes sense, and it's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that. That was a great answer. So Phil, when I reached out and we were trying to kind of figure out what we would talk about, can you maybe give a little bit of background as to maybe why you chose this song, "Beast in Me"? What maybe came up for you? And I mean, I thought it was a great choice, and I can't wait to get into it. But I'm just curious, kind of the process behind maybe why you chose it.
Well, this probably answered the question why I've been boiling with rage and
Mm,
unable to let it go for several days, really since the new year, about this whole UFC thing, and why
okay.
I just like bust out with it right away before we even had a chance to get started properly in proper monomaniacal fashion. Um, is because I suspect because what I see in all of these men, these weak men,
Mm,
giving up on their humanity, giving up on being men,
mm,
and just enjoying the sensation of being a beast. Throw off that troublesome, cumbersome, heavy, limiting cloak of your humanity.
yeah.
Doff it and allow the beast within to be who you are. That's the thing that drives me nuts, is seeing that, because I know that that's in me too,
Mm,
right?
absolutely.
All, talking about like self-regulation through the practice of music or boxing or whatever, um trying to be better. Better than what? Better for whom? Right? What
Yeah.
does that mean? There is a certain, a basic, just being a person. There is something it's like to be a person, and that is a good thing. There's
Mm.
a good thing it's like to be a person. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That resonates for sure.
And that thing doesn't just happen. You
Right.
gotta, that is what you practice. And why do that? Because there is this part of you, this beast in you. But the thing about it is, it gets more complicated than that, because you can't just keep the beast chained up in the damp basement of your psyche,
Mm,
right? Which was my approach for a long time.
sure.
Um, Idea of like, you crush those parts of you that you don't like.
Mm,
And in certainly in the time that I've been a practicing Zen Buddhist, which is probably the most important, which has been about 15 years, and that has been the most
okay.
important kind of input in my kind of worldview, my philosophy, as
Sure.
an adult. Something I didn't have as a kid, but something that's probably the most important orientation of my life now. Um, since beginning Zen practice, one thing that you really come face to face with is just sort of like, you're not trying to, I mean, just okay, for people who maybe have never meditated or don't know what it's about or what
Yeah.
Buddhism is about, like, your practice for the most part is sitting in meditation. Um, and there are other practices, but the big one is Zazen, which is Zen meditation, right? And in Zazen, it's like a basic mindfulness thing where you let whatever thoughts are in your head, you're not trying to push them down or repress them. You're not trying to not think, because that's impossible anyway.
Right.
Um, you're just kind of letting them be what they are, but you're not like grabbing onto them. You're not trying to identify yourself. You're not saying like that thought is me, which is normally what we do, right?
Sure.
Um, so from that point of view, that gives you kind of a means to understand why repression is not necessarily the best idea. And there's any number of reasons why, right? We can put it in a Jungian way and talk about the shadow. You know, the
Right.
shadow is what's cast by your figure, by who you are, and like the bit that you don't acknowledge, the bit behind you, the bit that's not in the light, that's the, you know, the bit that you disavow, that's your shadow, and it does some real damage
Mm.
if you don't know it's there. um and so you have to get real with the darker parts of yourself, with the beast in me.
Oh yeah.
And like I said, keeping it chained up in the basement doesn't work. That's how you get a shadow.
Mm.
What happens when that thing breaks loose? Now you really got problems,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
And so, like, that's, I mean, to put it as in a Zen way, that's a koan. That's a
Mm.
puzzle for us to figure out. How do you deal with that beast in you without just capitulating to it?
Mm.
How do you allow it its say in the inner Congress, or the inner Parliament, without it simply wrecking shop, without it just sort of destroying everything?
Sure. There's
And yeah, sorry.
no, 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 no. There's a spiritual author, Henry Nouwen, who was really influenced by like Carl Jung, and he would talk about befriending the parts of us that we want to disown. Does that language resonate at all? Is there a place for befriending this, or is that too friendly?
Might be a bit too friendly for me.
Okay, okay.
Uh,
The beast in you is maybe something you might not want to actually be friends with.
Beast in me doesn't respond well to kindness.
Okay.
But at the same time, though, also, this is like maybe a kind of a dark teaching of fight sports, of something that you get from actually training in fight
Yeah.
sports, from sparring and like having an actual fight. And, you know, it's the kind of fight where you shake hands before and after, you touch gloves. It's the kind of fight where there's, you know, your coach is telling you, okay, throw it 50%, so you're not just wailing on each other trying to knock each other out. It's very controlled. You know, there's a timer, blah blah blah. It's a sport. It's not a fight, but it's a fight.
Mm.
And there is something to be said for getting in a fight. Find out what where is that beast in me? It comes out
Mm.
when you're fighting.
Mm.
And in a fight, that beast in you is your friend to some extent. Like, you can't just wild out, you can't just allow the beast to have the final say, because I mean, it's often pointed out, like, if you fight angry, you're going to get knocked out.
Mm.
Or you're going to have some trouble, right? It isn't about emotion, but it is about this little part of you that's just, whose whole attitude is out of my way. It's about me,
Wow.
you know.
Oh yeah.
And and there's a part of there's a part of probably everybody, but I'm a man, so can only talk about being a man.
Sure.
um there's part of a man that is that, and one way or another you have to make your peace with that. But also, there are situations in your life where the beast in you gets to have a say.
Mm.
And the whole domain of fight sports, just to try and tie it back to where I started,
Sure.
is the whole domain of martial arts is a kind of alchemical operation.
Mm.
You know, in alchemy, you will start with, you know, you might start with literal shit, with valueless stuff,
Right.
with decayed animals, with stuff that you don't even want to touch, you don't even want to think about it. But the whole business with alchemy is that you're performing operations upon this material, where little bit by little bit you're refining it, you're purifying it, you're bringing something out of it that is latent and impossible. And the ideal of alchemy is to start with the lowest trash stratum, and to end up with the highest,
Mm.
right? And martial arts at its best is all about that. You take the the blackened putrescence part of yourself, the stuff that goes into what the alchemists, classical alchemists, would call the negrito.
Mm,
um, and you work with that, and you end up with a lump of gold. And that's the inner transformation, the inner alchemy that happens with something like martial arts, where you are letting the beast in you have a role, but it's ringed around with prohibitions, with things that sublimate that raw violence and turn it into something.
got you.
Um, and so the beast in me, a troublesome companion, a troublesome lifelong companion. It informs a lot of the idea of there being a beast in me forms a lot of my understanding of the kind of growth I've had to do and the kind of growth I
Mm,
continue to want to do. Um, the beast in me stands as a perennial challenge to understand all the parts of ourselves as being in some way necessary, even the ones we can hardly bear to look at.
sure.
The
Can
beast
I
in me is
can I
important,
ask
and
you
it has a
this?
lot to do with being a man, at least to me. Sorry,
Yeah.
I
No. Just because I know
yeah.
you and JF love going into metaphysics and psychology, we could almost even say like the meta psychology. Do you have any theories as to what the beast actually is? Like as you frame it and think about it, going philosophically, metaphysically, what is the beast in you? Do you have any kind of riffs on that?
Well, it's me in it.
Mm,
Um, there's a terrific meditation on the beast in all of us, in a novel by Ursula Le Guin called Wizard of Earthsea. Have you read
mm.
it?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, we did an episode of it on it ages ago. I couldn't tell you which one, but in any event, it's a really, really good story and not very long. And anybody listening to your podcast, I would suggest they read it. It's a terrific story,
Mm,
but it's about a powerful young sorcerer named Ged who goes to a wizard's college. And by the way, what's her name? The Harry Potter author, J.K. Rowling,
J.K.
um,
Rowling, yeah.
basically lifted much of the idea of the whole Harry Potter universe from Wizard of Earthsea, but be that as it may. Um, Wizard of Earthsea is a lot better than Harry Potter, in my humble opinion. Um, but in any event, in Wizard of Earthsea, this very powerful wizard named Ged, he's very powerful, but he's rather immature. And he's baited into a duel of magic by another student. And Ged wins, but at the cost of accidentally summoning this shadow monster that claws him and maims him and um, creates like just ripples of destruction through this community, through this school. And Ged, when he recovers from his mauling, is broken. Loses his confidence. He can hardly do magic for a while.
Mm,
He's so afraid of the power that he's released. He has all this power, and he's so afraid of this witless, reactive, angry release of his power that has caused all these problems for himself and for everybody around him. And at first he just wants to go somewhere and hide and just like live as a hermit, and then this shadow that he unleashes turns out it's still out there in the world and it's hunting him.
mm,
And so for a long time in this book he's trying to avoid it. He keeps meeting this thing. It takes over other people, turns them into zombies, and attacks him. um and finally he decides he can't run anymore and he has to turn around and chase this thing. And then there's like a video actually of a Massive Attack song. I forget the name of the song, but the video does this. It's a guy who's being chased by a horde of men until he turns around and he starts chasing them, and then they run. And that's what
mm,
happens with Ged's shadow. And eventually he defeats the shadow by embracing it, by becoming one with it.
mm,
Sort of spoiler, but and the way I described it, that maybe doesn't sound like a hell of a story, but it's really good. I
mm.
strongly recommend it. Um, So what is that shadow? Where does it come from? Well, it come, the wizards at the school tell Shadow that he's summoned a being of immense power from somewhere so deep, even they don't know where it comes from. It doesn't obey them. It doesn't obey anybody's magical power. It seems to be massively powerful and interested only in one person, which is Gad.
Mm,
And in the end, it's not him, but it kind of is him. I like that. I like that way of understanding the beast in us. To me, it's very psychologically acute.
mm.
Um, so I was sort of kidding around when I'm like, well, it's me in it, but like kind of is. But it's a part of me that comes from somewhere deep and dark and mysterious, and nobody really knows,
Mm.
man. From some pit, from some dark place, it came up.
Yeah, see, and I think one of the things that frustrates me about certain renditions of let's just say modern masculinity is that it's wrapped in this, clothing around certainty and control, and it looks like this every time, and you have to be this type of person, and the vision that you're articulating is shrouded in mystery and a kind of unknowing and a lack of control in some ways. And that just it's scary as fuck and troubling, but also there's something about it that really resonates with me.
Yeah, it is scary. Um, but yeah, I mean, this kind of gets us talking a little bit about some of the things that JF and I try to do in Weird Studies, which is, whole worldview basically founded on the idea of like, I don't know, that desire for epistemic closure is, of course, understandable. It's a means of exerting power in the
Sure.
world. And there are many, many situations in which I am not content with mystery. I do, in fact, want to know the answer. If I've got a medical thing like some ache and pain,
Mm,
I want to know what that is. I'm not content to be like, hey man, who can tell? The universe
sure,
is a strange place.
sure.
But when we're talking, yeah, but when we are talking about um things that border on the metaphysical, like, the beast in me, and where does that come from? That is a deep question.
Mm,
And we're trying to retain some of the sense of awe before it, as we feel before, an abyss opening at our feet. If you imagine, like, climbing in the mountains,
yeah,
having like a vast abyss at your feet, or staring up at a starry sky. I guess these are like very commonplace examples of what Edmund Burke called the sublime.
mm,
That kind of beauty, that thrill we get from things that are beautiful but also scary, like overwhelming and immensely bigger than ourselves. There is a kind of sublimity in the
yeah.
human. There's a sublimity in man. um
That leads me to ask, even looking at the lyrics when Lowe says, the beast in me is caged by frail and fragile bonds, restless by day and by night, rants and rages at the stars, God help the beast in me. I think about, the religious impulse and was just curious how the beast in us men is related to God, whatever the fuck that is, to the religious impulse that's been, I think, with humanity for as long as we can understand.
yeah, it is. I mean, it's easy to get this wrong what I'm about to say, but it is a
Sure.
religious mystery. Now,
Yeah.
when I say religion, even religious people don't like that word, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Because it has such a ring of authoritarianism. Of, like, you think of religion and you think of all the thou shalts and shalt nots of this
Sure.
religion and that religion, and all of the um, idiotic sectarian conflict that accompanies intolerance and bigotry, etc. But when I say religion, I feel like we need a sterner word than spiritual, because spiritual
Mm.
somehow always implies you can have it your way. I mean, I
Right.
don't any offense to anybody, but when people say I'm more spiritual than religious, I think often that means like, I have the same feelings, the sentiment of something vaster that includes but transcends me. As a religious person, I'm just not hung up on the rules and there's
Mm,
thou shalt and thou shalt not, right?
sure.
Um, but but I want to focus not on the me part, but the it part, that sense of something that transcends.
Right.
That's what I'm getting at when I use the word religious.
Mm,
The thing that, you know, the most common etymology of the word religion is it comes from Latin religare, which means to tie back, like when you're, you know, lashing grapevines or hop vines or something to a trellis.
mm,
That's a religare. Um, that religion is the tying back of myself to that transcendent thing, that thing that's bigger than me.
sure.
And so that's what I mean when I say a religious impulse. It's not to do with churches and robes and funny hats and all
Right.
the rest of it. It's that impulse, that feeling there's something bigger, and I want to tie myself to it because that is a good thing. I'm
Mm,
not a good thing on my own, but that's a good thing.
mm,
Um, and yeah, when we're talking in those terms, we're talking about forces. We could call them entities or beings if you like, or we could call them forces if you like. But you know, we're in a world of gods now. Doesn't have to be, you know, the great big capital G God, right? I sometimes say
right.
I don't believe God, but I certainly believe in the gods,
Yes.
plural.
Well said.
And all of these things in us, not just the beast in me, but like the lover in me,
Mm,
the artist in me, the father in me, etc. I could keep going on.
sure.
Those are gods. Beast in me is a god too, a terrible and dark god, but a god nonetheless.
Mm. No, that's so fascinating. And then I'm just I don't have an answer, but I'm now thinking if the beast in me is a god, and I would resonate with that way of framing it, in what way do I seek to relate to it or maybe even worship it or sacrifice to it, if we kind of carry that metaphor a little bit further. I don't know if that would be appropriate, but it's at least getting me to think a little bit. What's my relation to it?
You know, that is a very important question. And my one thing I've learned to do in recent years is to actually ask it.
Mm,
Actually ask it. So this is something that there's I wish I could remember names. I'm getting old, can't remember, but there's some famous psychotherapist who um, came up with a kind of therapy known as voice dialogue
okay.
work.
I'm not familiar with that. Man, that's interesting.
Yeah, and somewhere in here, can you hold on for just a moment?
Oh yeah,
I'm
sure.
I'm gonna get something off my shelf over there.
Yeah, not a problem at all.
One thing I collect is card decks, particularly of oracle decks and tarot decks, um, things
Nice.
that people consult in order to get answers to questions. And this is one I picked up recently called Selves in a Box by J. Tamar Stone.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
Stone might be the name, not, I don't think it's this person, but might be another person named Stone who came up with voice dialogue work.
Okay.
Um, in any event, sorry, still vague on the details, but this contains a whole bunch of cards, and all of the cards are cards of different selves. So, for instance, I think find an example. Oh, for fuck's sake! Too many of those. Too many of those. Like, if you're interested in this deck, maybe you'd be interested in this other deck. Okay, here's one. That's just the first card I picked up.
Sure.
The
Ah,
Visionary.
the visionary.
Right. On occasion, I've had good results being like, I'm feeling some really confused, strong feelings, and I don't know, or I'm doing something that's a little weird to me. Like, why am I doing this? I don't under in a situation where I find myself behaving in a way that I don't understand.
Mm,
I will sometimes pull cards from this deck, and I've had some real success with it, saying like, who are the selves? Who are the beings in me, the little gods in me? Keep in mind, they're not just personal gods, not just gods in me, they're gods in you too.
mm,
By you, I mean anybody who's like watching this or listening to it.
yeah.
Um, Sometimes you can do a pull, and it's like, so that's who's making me flip out right now. It's the visionary or whatever, some part of me, right? Um, so anyway, all of this to say, what are we to do with this? Like, one thing that this voice dialogue work is about is actually talking to those parts of the self. And I discovered this for myself quite by accident one night when I couldn't sleep, and I woke up and my heart was hammering. I was having kind of a panic attack.
Mm,
And I'm not going to go into it was a situation in my life where I was stepping up to a new level of responsibility, and I was flipping out.
got you.
And I meditated to kind of cool out, and it wasn't helping. And I was just sort of like, I just kind of asked, like, whatever this thing was that was making my heart hammer. I was like, oh, okay, well, who are you, and what do you want? And I'm not exactly going to try and explain exactly how I got answers, or how I knew that they were real answers and not just me talking to myself, but
Sure.
like my conscious mind saying things that my conscious mind wants to hear.
Yeah.
But suffice it to say, like, it was not rage or anger, but fear that I ended up talking to. And I remember asking my fear, and again, I'm glossing over a lot of details, like, how did I get answers
Sure.
that I can paraphrase in our conversation? But at one point it was just sort of like, well, what's up with you, fear?
Mm,
What's going on? Why are you here? Why are you so present? Why are you so much here right now? And the answer was surprising me. It was like, you and me, we used to be beautiful, and
mm,
now you just keep me chained up in that damn basement. That was
wow.
surprising. You'd
Wow.
think that I would, having a conversation with myself, you'd think I would know what my answers would be, but I was
Yeah.
surprised by that. And I have since done this kind of work in a more organized and like a more structured way, working with
Sure.
somebody who actually does this kind of thing. Um, but the fact is that you can, it, there will always be a mystery about these entities swarming in our insides, who they are and what they want, what our destiny is, and blah blah blah. If I knew all that stuff, man, I'd be the one with a podcast on
I don't want to be
on
like too
on psychological matters.
there you go. I don't want to be too reductionistic, but I feel like for a lot of men, the errors are to either overly identify with the beast and just let it take over, or to suppress or repress it and deny its existence. I
Exactly.
what I hear from you is figuring out a way to creatively relate to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Precisely. Um, One way or another, you got to get on. It's part of
Yeah.
you. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people's answer is just sort of like to just denial and just like, that's not part of me. But as you say, that's one of two possible extremes, the other being completely identifying with the beast. And that was the thing I was talking about with that um, uh, Samuel Johnson quote from earlier, that,
Right.
a man gets rid um, of the man part of him,
Yes.
it becomes a beast in order to get rid of the pain, the burden of being a man.
Mm,
That's the other side. That's the opposite, the 180-degree opposite of denying you even have that part. And yet those two can end up looking remarkably similar, right?
absolutely. Yes. Okay, Phil, can I read another part of the song? And because I just wanted to hear
Please.
okay, so he says, this beast in me tries to kid me that it's just a teddy bear or even somehow manage to vanish in the air. And that is when I must be aware of the beast in me that everybody
Yeah.
knows. What comes to mind when you hear that? Do you have a sense of what he was trying to communicate? Not that there's one thing, but
Well, part of it also is this is a song, and so the melody, the way the melody works with the words there is really cool. This is
mm,
a bridge, right? This is like you know, what jazz musicians would call the bridge or the middle eight, the channel, um, because pop songs very often have very repetitive form where you have a phrase, let's call it A, and then you repeat it. So it's A. And then the bridge or the middle eight or whatever is going to be like the bit that is a different theme. It's a different tune. So we could say that's B. And then after that, we're going to have a return to the thing we heard at the beginning. So you might end up with a structure that's sort of like AABA.
mm,
Technical term for that is lyric binary, by the way. I'm a musicologist. That's what I do
nice. Drop
for a
the
living.
fucking
So,
mic, man.
so of course I'm going to talk about song form, but like the middle eight, the channel, the this contrasting B section. This is often where we're gonna change up the mood a little bit, maybe lighten the mood a little bit, right? And
Mm,
so here, with a kind of insouciance, like the way the melody is flipping around, da 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 da. He's like, sometimes it tries to kid me, like it's just a teddy bear. Change up the mood.
mm.
The music lightens a little bit, and always, or somehow even manage to vanish in the air. Right? The song changes its mind, just as we're hearing, like sometimes you think you've changed your mind. I'm a new person. I'm a new man now.
Right.
I'll never drink again. I'll never
Mm,
hit my wife again. Blah blah blah.
mm.
All that stuff, right?
Sure.
Like, just for the record, in case anybody wants to quote me out of context, I've never hit my wife. I'm talking about fucking Dana White.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
Uh, fuck that guy. Um, but no, that's not it. That's not it. That's the whistling past the graveyard part of the song,
Mm,
right? Where the song itself, the way the melody hangs on our ears, telling us, oh, hey, it's not so bad. Oh, no, it is.
mm.
It's like, and that is when I must beware of the beast in me. I love the way that comes back.
I do too.
There's some tricky enjambment going on with the way it's written, which I'm not going to bore you all like trying to explain or you just try to figure out in my head. Um,
Do you think there's something to some people call it the Mr. Nice Guy syndrome, or in therapy, in my experience, when there's men that are really kind of repressing certain things, that's when I'm most terrified of the beast in them, coming out in some of the ways that you were describing.
yeah. Um, yeah, because it can get unpredictable, can it?
Mm,
I can give you
absolutely.
I can give you an example from my own life.
Please, if you feel comfortable sharing, sure.
Sure, some years ago. Well, I shared this in front of more than 100 people, so
There you go.
I've already done feeling embarrassed about this. I've had to process this. So this is a big undergraduate music history class that I sometimes teach. I teach at Indiana University at Jacob School of Music, one of the largest, most prestigious schools of music in the world. And so this is an undergraduate music history class. There's more than 100 people in there. And one day people were just squirrely and they're talking and talking. And so I'm like, I'm like, all right, let's get going. And, I'm pretty loud. And so like people see that, they hear it, they
Sure.
focus in. And this one day, um, they just weren't. And it was like I was invisible. People just kept talking and I'm sort of saying louder and louder. All right, we're going to get going. Okay, we're going to get going. And I wasn't in a bad mood that day by any means. Felt pretty good. Um, but all of a sudden, this blind rage just overtook me, possessed me. It was as if, like, imagine that I'm like some kind of robot Mac, right? Like I'm a man-shaped robot, and there's this guy inside me who's talking to you right now, my conscious, rational intellect, that's pulling the levers and making me move my arms and talk and so on. And it's as if uh, the beast in me just barged into the control room, pushed that guy off to one side, grabbed the mic, and yelled. And let me tell you, I'm loud when I get mad. I can get loud. I yelled something like, shut the fuck up. Jesus fucking Christ, what's wrong with you?
I,
Something like that. I
my
can't
fantasy
remember.
of that was that you had yelled, "Motherfuckers, shut the hell up."
Close.
Okay, close, close.
And I don't swear in front of my undergraduates. I do swear more than I should probably in front of graduate students, but try to keep it clean for the undergrads. This was untypical of me, right? This was uncharacteristic behavior. And it was just the sheer intensity of this. This
Mm,
was like a million volts of electricity discharged in 1 second. It was like a bolt of lightning. And the shocked silence,
mm.
this sort of V-shaped wake of silence that followed this moment of violence. And just as quickly as the beast grabbed the mic, dropped the mic, and left, leaving good old Phil to like try and figure out to save the situation. Now that sounds like I'm trying to doff the responsibility. Oh, it
Mm,
wasn't me, it was the beast in me that
right.
was very rude and abusive to a room full of students. I immediately apologized and then continued to apologize for a while. Obviously, some students were quite upset, and I had to, and rightly had to apologize because it's totally unprofessional to do something like that.
Mm,
Um, but I had to think a lot about that because there's also, I'm like, yeah, but okay, why? Why did the beast decide to grab the mic at that particular moment? Because on some level, I was sick of being disrespected.
wow.
You know, teaching that class, a required course, everybody has to take it. It's quite difficult. It's a difficult class. It happens at the end of people's curriculum, so they're trying to finish this very demanding degree, and this asshole is trying to make my life more difficult. It's a tough situation. Nobody chose to take that class. They have to. It's a required course.
Yeah.
And so managing your relationship with students in that can be tricky. And you have to be humble,
Mm,
and you have to understand, like, this is not the 50s. You can't just be the Prussian military officer type
right.
professor who comes in and screams at people and kicks people out of the class and locks the door so people can't come in late and stuff like you don't do that anymore. And I mean, I wouldn't want to anyway, because that's like kind of being an asshole.
Right, right. And we've already identified that you're just a partial asshole. So
I'm only a partial asshole. That's right. So on the one hand, you can't do that, but then at the same time, like, you also can't just let people walk all over you.
mm,
Not, and I'm not saying that from point of view of like, you got to show them what's what, you got to show them
right.
who's what. It's for you. Like, you can't be untrue to yourself. If you're feeling like you're being disrespected, you have to find some way to communicate that. You have to actually do the work in the classroom to let people know, like, this isn't appropriate, this is how we're
Mm,
going to go, we're going to do this going forth, this is how we're not going to do it. There's proper ways to do this, and
right.
screaming shut the fuck up is not one of them. I wish to emphasize that, but I realize, like, I'm actually a somewhat conflict averse person. I don't
Mm,
like fighting with people. For all I've enjoyed, like, learning how to box or whatever, I'm not a combative person. And so what's easy for me is actually to get too much into a sort of an agreeable, like, okay, well, I'm going to let that go. I'm going to let that go. I'm going to let that go. But there's this one part of me that just the whole time is like, this is bullshit, and isn't having it.
mm,
And I could decide, well, you're just going to have to calm down, right?
right.
But what I can't do is just ignore it and just ignore it and just ignore it, because at a certain point one day, that beast in me is just going to be like, okay, we've tried doing this the easy way. No, we're going to do it the hard way. We're going to
Mm,
do it the way. And the feeling of like allowing myself to be to go along, get along, it was not ultimately even about that class. It had to do with like larger things to do with my relationship to academia, a lot of resentments that I was beginning to form about
got you.
academia, which, to be honest, that's why, for me, I mean, JF has his own reasons for doing weird studies, but why I wanted to start doing weird studies was to basically vocational therapy, to have the kind of conversations that I wanted to have, that I got into academic work to have, and that I felt were getting harder and harder to have with
Mm,
the and the neoliberalization of the academy. That's a whole different conversation that I don't want to have right now.
sure.
But it had to do with a lot of that, a lot of feeling of like that I was not living authentically, that
Mm,
I was trying to make myself say that there's no problem when in fact there was a problem. So
I like it.
so if you don't deal with those kinds of things, yeah, you might get a little visit from the beast.
Yeah.
I have found this to be the case.
Yeah, and this was, just to think about a different metaphor. What's coming up for me is as we explore what it means to relate to the beast. I know we didn't love the idea of kind of befriending it, but maybe there's a place to appropriately feed it, which I don't think means letting it grow into this monstrous proportion where it then lashes out like Dana White and other fuckholes, but it's feeding it so that it's kind of taken care of and doesn't control you. Maybe
Yeah.
that's too simplistic, but there
No,
might be something there.
there's ways of there are a lot of different relationships you can have with people that are cooperative relationships that are not exactly friendships.
Okay. Oh, this is good.
You know, you can have you don't have to be friends with everybody, but I
I'd
sort
prefer
of
not to be.
for some reason it's not a perfect image, but for some reason what's popping in my head, probably, actually I'll tell you why it's popping in my head, the movie LA Confidential. The opening scene is of Bud White, one of James Ellroy's terrifying hard-boiled like tough guy cop characters, beating the ever-living fuck out of a wife abuser.
Mm.
uh, One of my favorite scenes. um I yeah, yeah, I've been and perhaps unsurprisingly have been thinking about that scene in recent days.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Anyway, later, like, it's about these two cops who hate each other and even
Okay.
try to destroy one another, and realize that they're both actually being played by someone who's the real villain, and
Mm.
they end up joining forces. And the fact is that even at the end of the movie, after they've taken down the bad guy, they've gotten in a gunfight, and somewhat the worse for wear, or whatever. Like, even for all that, they're still not exactly friends, but like, but they fought this intense battle together, and that's like close enough. You know what I mean?
Maybe there's like a mutual respect, and I think there's something to that, like learning to respect the beast within. I think that's one of the
Yes.
ways to kind of tame it or manage it is fucking
Yeah.
respecting that thing.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. And it may not be your buddy,
Right,
not
right.
be your favorite drinking buddy. Probably shouldn't be,
Right.
but that dude's pretty good with his fists, pretty
Mm.
good with a gun. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, absolutely,
I'm
Phil.
thinking of
No,
the
no.
character in the movie,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
literally
yeah.
with the
Sure,
gun.
sure. I know,
Right. I'm a
absolutely.
peaceful man, but
Yeah. No, same here. No, thinking about it metaphorically for sure. Now, Phil, can we just look at the last part of the song? Because this was a piece that I didn't know how to make sense of it. I think you'll probably help me out. When he says that everybody knows they've seen him out dressed in my clothes, patently unclear if it's New York or New Year. God help the beast in me, the beast in me. What is he talking about there? Do you have any thoughts?
it's so wonderfully unclear.
Okay, okay. I was like, man, what the fuck is going on here?
Again, I love the way it's set in music, where
Mm,
they've seen him out there dressed in my clothes, patently unclear. I'm sorry, I have a terrible voice. Um,
it's better than mine.
and then he's patently unclear, and there's a pause. And at first you think they've seen him out there in my clothes, patently unclear. What does that mean?
Mm,
I think that people seeing the beast in my clothes is unclear that it's me or him. But then the line actually turns out to be wrapped up in the next line, not the previous line.
got you.
Patently unclear if it's New York or New Year.
Right.
That I love the way those words, patently unclear, just hang out. And they're like Janus face. They look at the
Mm,
backwards, the previous line, and forward to the next line. And it's unclear if that's really me or if it's the beast. It's patently unclear if it's New York or New Year. It could be, New York or New Year. I think of that as like occasions in which I might be out there wilding out, having myself a time. I'm in New York, big city. It's New Year's Eve,
mm,
bright lights, drinking, fast company. That play of shifting identities, shifting places and places and times, patently unclear. All of it.
mm.
The soup, the soup of experience, different things swimming in it, and the beast in me. Sometimes we're not clear where he is in all this,
Mm.
what role he is playing at any given time. God help the beast in me.
Wow. I think where there's a humility for me in that is, in my opinion, I don't know that there's a finality in terms of when I'm going to get rid of this beast. I don't think I'm actually ever going to get rid of the beast in me. He will continue to pop up, and like we've been talking about, I'm going to have to continue to learn how to relate to him.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a book that we've been reading on in installments on the podcast on Weird Studies, Meditations on the Tarot.
Oh yeah, I'm actually reading that. I do another kind of based on your work. I actually the guy who painted the painting that's behind me. He created a tarot deck, and we're going through the major arcana on our podcast.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh, that's
And
dope.
yeah, yeah,
Nice.
and I love the meditations on the tarot. It's amazing.
Very wise book.
Oh yeah.
Very wise book. And I can't remember, we talked about this in one of our episodes, but I can't remember which card it was, which chapter. Um, and it's a book of Christian esotericism. I'm not Christian, but I find it very wise, and it actually
Mm,
speaks to a lot of things in the religion that I am a part of, Buddhism. But somewhere he's talking about the cross and the symbolism of the cross, and he talks about um, what it is to carry the cross, to bear the cross,
mm,
and he's talking about how in life, whether we're talking individuals or nations, there are enmities, there are conflicts that it seems like they're irresolvable. So he uses as an example the standoff between the USA and the USSR because he wrote this in the 60s, back in the heart of the Cold War.
yeah.
But we might say now maybe a kind of inveterate standoff between um, Trumpian, like Trump followers, for
Sure.
example, not just Republicans, but specifically the Trump parts of American conservatism,
Right.
and the most progressive side of the Democratic Party, right? Maybe in the middle, there's some room for crossover between people who are slightly right and slightly left. But like, obviously, as everybody knows, American politics are super polarized now.
Oh
And it
yeah.
feels like all it is the extremes, right?
Sure.
And those extremes hate each other, and they can't, and they view everything in terms of who's winning and who's losing. Everything is judged in terms of whether our team is winning or their team is winning. And the goal, if you are in a polarized situation like that, is to win, is to seek the absolute extermination of your enemy, not necessarily to have them all killed, but like you imagine perhaps that all the people in the tendency that you don't like are somehow going to be converted to your point of view, or they somehow are going to be dealt some final political blow where they will never again enjoy political power or something. There's some fantasy in your head of
Mm,
total winning and total losing that you play out that keeps you going. And yet, and this is the point that Valentin Tonberg, the author of Meditations on the Torah, makes, you will never get rid of them.
mm,
The inveterate struggles in your life, I'm using a political metaphor here, but it can also be like everybody listening to me talking can probably think of at least one person in their life who were like, whatever else happens, I will never be able to stand that person. I can never stay in the same room with that person. I'll never, ever have a kind word to say to or about that person. Tonberg's point, that person's not going away.
yeah.
You will never completely win. Um, however much you might hate Trump and his followers, and I really hate Trump. Um, they're still going to be there tomorrow.
Right.
And now what? And carrying the cross means carrying that burden, figuring out the carry the thing, like you have these two opposite things, like they're at opposite axes to one another, irreconcilable, and yet somehow they have to be reconciled somehow.
Yes. Do you
And
think
and
this
those,
resonates with Heraclitus and his idea of polemos or war being the father of all things? That there's this intractable tension
yeah,
in our universe that we just can't get rid of. I'm sorry to
that's
interrupt you, but
no,
I
that's
know
good.
you
That's very
guys love
good.
Heraclitus too.
No, that's very good. You know, if you could somehow just cut all of that tension out, resolve the most stubborn antinomies in your life, would you really want to?
I don't
That's the
think so.
question that that's the question that comes up with your invocation of Heraclitus
Sure,
too,
sure.
because it is the conflict that produces. I mean, why would I need to get to understand myself better if I didn't need to have to deal with this fucking beast?
Right, right, right.
You know,
Yes.
if the tension goes slack, then I don't know. Then there's no growth, there's no movement, nothing interesting ever happens, nothing
Mm,
ever happens.
mm,
And so that's a confusing thing about being a human, right? Is
mm,
understanding that all of this trouble, all this suffering is in some way not a bug, it's a feature. It's
mm,
necessary in some way.
mm.
And so the beast must be necessary too. I just can't stand the motherfucker though.
I
I haven't
know.
figured that one out.
I know. See, I always now, I'm 37. I've done my own kind of in-depth therapy. I mean, I sit with people all day long, working with their psyches, and I think I've come to the conclusion that if a person can't say what you just said, I hate this motherfucker, they haven't really had an encounter with the beast. They're just kind of maybe playing around, but until you really get close to it, you don't really know it.
Yeah, not a teddy bear,
It's not a
an
teddy bear.
actual bear.
Right, right, which is scary as fuck.
Yeah, who is that? Was that like that movie Grizzly Man about that guy who thought he could just like be super friendly with the grizzly bears until they ended up eating him?
I'm not
Do you know
familiar
what
with
I'm
that,
saying?
but that sounds terrifying.
Yeah. Well, I'm, again, I'm lousy on the details, but that would be an example, perhaps a an anecdote that would literalize what we're talking about.
Sure, sure. Okay, so Phil, this has been incredible. I want to be sensitive to your time. I'm just curious if there's any last thing, either from the song or just from your own perspective, that you could kind of end with in terms of thinking about, the beast in me, the beast in us, the beast in men. And obviously it applies to more than just those that identify as male, but that is kind of the scope of the podcast, is trying to
Sure.
help men think about some of these issues.
Listen to the song, because the thing
Yeah.
I love about the song is actually the weary compassion that
Mm.
drips from every note of that song.
Wow. Weary compassion. Dude, I love that.
Compassion and patience are what it called for.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Phil, would you mind just ending with like the line of this podcast, which is just continue the conversation?
Continue the conversation. I can think of no better way to end.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.